Because of his stroke, Fetterman's campaign required closed captioning technology for this interview to essentially read our questions as we ask them. And Lester, in small talk before the interview without captioning, it wasn't clear he was understanding our conversation.
That was an NBC reporter explaining the difficulties that she had while interviewing Pennsylvania Senate candidate John Fetterman. He suffered a stroke back in May. The Real Clear Politics average poll shows a razor-thin margin between Republican Dr. Mehmet Oz and Fetterman, while the Cook Political Report has shifted the race from leans Democrat to toss-up. Joining me right now, the man himself facing off against Fetterman. He is Senate candidate Dr. Mehmet Oz. Dr. Oz, great to see you this morning. Thanks so much for being here. I got to get your reaction to this. There's Fetterman in an interview, reading the questions that she's saying. Is somebody typing in his answers? What was that all about?
It's called closed captioning, as you know. It's actually what he has requested in the only debate he's granted me, which will be in 2 weeks, so it's getting towards the end here. But finally, I'm going to be able to talk to him. That was the first interview that Dr. Burns was referring to with him in person. And listen, I've got tremendous compassion for John Fetterman. I'm a doctor who's actually specializing in heart failure, irregular heartbeats, strokes. These are the things he's been suffering from. And I'm glad that he's getting back on the campaign trail. But this isn't about me or the reporter or anybody else, but the voters. They deserve transparency. And John Fetterman's team has repeatedly refused to release his medical records. In that interview, he refused 12 times to talk about his medical records. And the question for the voters is, what's he hiding? You know, be transparent about what you're up to. Either you've got a medical problem, which we can work through, or you're hiding a radical agenda, which is a bigger concern that I have. And I want to point out that there's a ton of money pouring into Pennsylvania from Democrats who just want the 51st seat. And they don't realize how far left liberal John Fetterman is. So if you're worried by that, please go to droz.com and support me. But all we have to do in a democracy is make sure people are informed so they can make up their mind. We're not doing that fully in Pennsylvania if John Fetterman is not releasing his medical records or answering questions about his radical agenda.
Well, it's also very questionable to understand the need for this computer to be with him. I mean, how is he going to make decisions about Pennsylvania and fight for the Pennsylvanian people if, in fact, he needs to have a device alongside him? So, I mean, is this just all the time he needs that device, or is it just during an interview? I don't understand.
No one knows. We've not been actually exposed to this before. It's the first in-person interview. Here we are, less than a month before the election, and I've been asking John Fetterman to answer questions on the campaign trail. Initially, he wasn't even on the campaign trail for the first couple months. But answer questions from voters, answer questions from reporters while you're actually campaigning. That's what we normally do in a democracy. And the concern, of course, is that if you don't ever leave your home and answer questions, we don't know the answers to the questions you're asking. But I don't think there's closed captioning on the floor of the Senate. And maybe he doesn't need closed captioning when he's actually moving around. But maybe he does. Again, a lot of question marks, and voters deserve better.
Well, let's talk about his policy. You say that he is a radical liberal. Tell me what that means in terms of his policies, because President Biden is supporting him. He's actually holding a fundraiser for Fetterman next week, just days ahead of your debate with him, which is happening on the 25th. What do you deem as the most important policy that we need to understand about Fetterman?
Well, just as an observation, if Joe Biden is coming to Pennsylvania to support John Fetterman, it's because the voters think John Fetterman is too far left. They think Biden will pull him back to the middle. My concern is Fetterman will go to the Senate and pull Biden further to the left, which we realize has already happened. So I'll give you a couple examples. He has strong sentiments about releasing 1/3 of all prisoners from our jails. He sought the release of over 3 dozen convicted murderers sentenced to life in prison. This is over the objections of other Democrats. He wants to legalize all drugs in Pennsylvania, which is a problem because we've got a huge fentanyl issue here, and that's, of course, caused by an open border. He also wants heroin injection sites, and I'm going to downtown Philadelphia to hold a press conference today where I'll be taking questions from everyone, by the way, unlike what John Fetterman does. And I'm going to say, no, we can't have heroin injection sites. It creates these open-air drug markets that destroy communities. These are just a couple of his weaknesses on law and order and drugs. I can go into economic issues and shock your audience, but just to leave you with one little tidbit, he's asked for increased taxes in every job he's had as mayor, as lieutenant governor. He supported the Biden tax increase, but he hasn't paid his own taxes 67 times. So there's a hypocrisy there that's driving voters crazy. It's one of the reasons the polls have closed so fully.
Wow. Okay. We got to get to the crime and the economic issues, because crime, as you mentioned, with the release of the murderers and the prisoners, is obviously going to get worse. This is one of the biggest issues ahead of the midterms. 3 Philadelphia police SWAT officers were shot while serving a warrant yesterday morning alone. What is your solution to impacting the crime story as we see crime spike across Philadelphia and Pennsylvania?
Well, just to put this in perspective, if you're shooting SWAT officers, you completely disrespect the police. And that's what we're experiencing here in Pennsylvania. I'm down in the southeast in Philadelphia right now. There were 2 murders right down the street from where I am, and this is where I live. And I was endorsed unanimously by the Fraternal Order of Police and the state troopers, because they know that I'll push to ensure that what they are trying to do is respected. They have to be able to do their jobs. Public safety is a cornerstone of a healthy economy. Businesses and families are leaving Philadelphia. So I'm going to, for example, push back on John Fetterman's desire to oppose cash bail. That prioritizes criminals over the innocent. And these individuals can go off and reoffend continually. We have to create a semblance that if there's a crime, there's a consequence of the crime. We cannot have the lawlessness that's raging in Philadelphia. We also have to recruit more police officers. We don't have enough people who want to run towards the crisis because they don't think anyone has their back.
Yeah, and just to be clear, if the Democrats hold on to the majority in the Senate, we will see higher taxes. The Republicans are promising to try to stop higher taxes, but you're saying that he's voted for higher taxes in his previous jobs. Do we have a sense of how he'll vote on President Biden's plans to raise taxes to pay for his climate change agenda?
Well, as lieutenant governor, in addition to wanting to ban fracking, he has lobbied for a 46% increase in the state tax, which we have. It's a shockingly high number. So we know exactly how he's going to vote. He'll vote for more taxes because he wants to spend the money. He argued that Biden should have spent more than the $5 trillion we already expended. Again, recklessly taking our children's money and throwing it at social problems without evidence that it works. But across the board, we know he's going to pull Joe Biden to the left. We cannot afford another senator who will do that.
All right, we will leave it there. Dr. Oz will be watching all of this. Thanks very much for being here this morning.